I want to thank you all for coming. We thought this event would be a great opportunity to just kick off our Sustainability Month, where we focused on the history of sustainable decisions within the firm and how that's progressed 65 years later into work that's currently under construction and work that is about to really emerge into San Francisco. But Peter will start off presenting the history of some of the houses.
Thank you, Ursula. The question was put to me, did we do any sustainable design in the early days? And the answer is we did a lot of stuff, but we never called it sustainability. We didn't know that word, and we didn't use that word, and it was not a very self-conscious or organized thing. There was no lead, there were very little literature. Joe was subscribed to a Canadian environmental journal in the 50s, and he had a collection of them that he read avidly and was very much up on various kinds of things that were going on, improvements in insulation and other sorts of things. But what we did was self-conscious and what today some people would call sustainability, but that wasn't the way we thought about it then. Whoops. So I want to start with Carey House. This is all early 1960s. I only have 4 examples. Carey was a house designed for a doctor and his painter wife. On a west-facing hill in Mill Valley, looking at Mount Tamalpais to the west. And this is the southern exposure. And we would call this sun control. And that was about the maximum, the closest we ever came to calling it anything green or sustainable. The houses were, because it was Mill Valley and Mill Valley was a woodsy place, Joe wanted to use shingles, and these people were very much into the ideas that Joe was trying to express. So these southern windows are all shaded in various ways by these wooden trellises. And you can see they're relatively effective. One of the things about it was Joe was very aware of and sensitive to the quality of light inside, not only the sun coming in or natural light coming in, but reflections and patterns and that kind of thing. So these trellises sort of fit into that. Here's this wonderful window wall. Joe never expressed any aesthetic ideas about this until maybe 20 years later. He said he was influenced by Clifford Still, the painter who has painted positive and negative spaces with abstract patterns. And Joe sort of intimated that this was positive and negative spaces and abstract patterns, and that apparently he thought about it at the time, but he didn't mention it to any of us. But you can see the house is, this is a nice rainy day, so there isn't, the sunshine is not there, but it had wonderful quality of light, and natural light and sunshine came in various places. Another feature about this house was the stair had this skylight, and the feature of the skylight was that it was the highest ventilation point. The skylight was not an operable skylight. It had a flap that, you can see it here. This is a working drawing, so the skylight is, there's a split line here, but you can see the skylight taking off from this side, and it came over a structure that was outside the house. Outside, this is the stair hall from that wall to that wall, but this structure came over the outside of the house, and it had a flap that came down like this and was operated by a cord and a pulley. So that's what those cleats are the the ropes that operated that skylight. Well, the benefit of that skylight, two benefits. One is you could not see any skylight structure, so you looked up and you just saw the sky. The other benefit is it was a wonderful natural ventilation device. So, and the house was wonderful in that way. It was always very comfortable. This is Burmack. Burmack is interesting in that it's on a very steep hillside to the west, and its floor plan is essentially a rectangle. The long axis points directly and very accurately at the Golden Gate, center of the Golden Gate. And so, and that view is the most dramatic, but certainly not the only view. This is an interesting, I'll show you another shot a little bit later. This is in the beginning. There's hardly any foliage around the house at all. But again, very much sun control with these trellises that are simply bolted on the outside of the structure, and do a great job of shading the windows from the south sun and the southwest sun. One of the things is we always had a sun control. Everybody had a sun controlled, a plotting device that where you could tell where the sun is at any time of the year and how long the shadows would be, and you could plot all this out. And we usually did in our design process, so we had a good idea about what was going on. And I don't think we had air conditioning in either of these houses. There was all natural ventilation. And
the glass single pane?
The glass was double pane when we found out about it. The interesting thing is it's 48 feet from there to the ground. That's the upper deck at the living room. Here's a picture that was taken maybe 10 years ago. The house now sits in this pine and redwood forest, and you can't even see it from the road. But it's really quite nice. And of course, all of that helps make the house more comfortable, part of the sun control. This is the west side, and you can't quite see it, but the trellis is hanging out there at some distance from the window. There's a lot of blank area here to shade the western sun. This is a sun pattern here from the south, not part of the view. So here's McLeod, designed it at about the same time, and you can see that it's got similar ideas going, where the trellis is providing some sun control for these big dining room windows. In this case, this is the north side, and where there's no trellis of any kind. And the sitting room, the one that's farthest down towards the eastern view, has no sun control outside whatsoever. But again, there's a lot of natural ventilation going on in this house, and that was part of it. This is the original plan. There was only one floor originally. And then the boys' bedrooms. The boys all lived in this room here. 3 boys. One of them, 2 or 3 years ago, showed me the scars on the floor where they taped out their territories. But then they built this floor below with bedrooms for each of them. And you know, the spaces are large. You know, one of the interesting things is that the roof is 2x4s on edge, nailed together, and with a layer of insulation on top of that. And I don't know what the measurement would be for thermal transmission, but it is quite effective in being fairly cool, controlled inside. Insulation, we always use a good amount of insulation inside, but again, these days we'd probably use more. that is, if we did these houses today, they would probably be made with 2x8s and have that much insulation in the wall and more in the roof. One of the ideas that about this house was the view was both down and up, so the windows are very high, and Joe was very sensitive to the light and the reflections of the light and how it reflected off of the ceiling and the walls and the floor and the various things that happen. You know, for instance, Joe enjoyed something like this enormously, to see those patterns being developed on the walls. And of course they come and go as the sun moves. And some of you have been there. But you can see what a, you know, I don't know how you might express it, but a very pleasant environment. Sea Ranch is interesting, also designed about the same time, but Sea Ranch is a whole another set of issues about the wind and the environment and sighting. And it's usually cold and windy up there, or foggy, relatively few times when it's really hot. And so sun control was not a big issue, but sighting and the shape of the buildings developed out of these ideas that the wind is blowing all the time, almost all the time, and what can you do with that? So the idea was that you, whoops, what did I do? Idea is that you shape the building so that you have an area behind the house on the leeward side where the wind is very gentle, or much more gentle than it would otherwise be. And so here's another diagram that was made about that. And you know, we studied all these ideas from sort of abstract notions about wind patterns, and also what Joe learned in the Navy on the bridge of a destroyer or an aircraft carrier, whichever one he was on, that was where the railing was shaped to protect it from the wind somewhat. But and then here's some abstract sketches that Joe made. One of the ideas was bury the house in some kind of a hole so the wind would go over it. You wouldn't have to deal with it. But this is the way it had ended up. And Joe said if we just studied those plants, we would have learned everything we needed to know. Here's McIntyre. McIntyre is interesting because this lady was from, Mrs. McIntyre was from Chicago. She did not believe anything that she had ever heard about the nice weather and living conditions outdoors, and didn't want to have anything to do with it. So what she wanted was a garden inside the house. And that's what this is, a garden room. High ceiling because she wanted to grow trees inside. Ceiling of skylights made with precast concrete. This is the entrance looking in. There, you can see this tree growing nicely inside. Now, so how do you deal with that? Well, what we did was to the skylights, you know, just fill the roof is entirely open. That's a double skylight, so it's somewhat insulated. The ventilation is louvers in the baseboard around the room in various locations, and then these elements of the skylights are hopper that open. So you get, and then underneath the house is entirely a air circulation space. A complicated thing where the air has to travel back and forth, and in doing that it cools it down about 15 degrees from the outside temperature, so that when you open up the vents, excuse me, comes up from that crawl space, cool, and cools the room off and goes out the upper with sort of a natural ventilation. It's a very pleasant, gardeny space, but quite comfortable.